All right. I'm here to record again with Sarah Savory. We've been having fun. Maybe this will be broadcast. Maybe it won't. But we've been talking about how to make the holistic decision framework or the decision making more to make it easier. Yeah, to make it easier to be adopted by regular folks, urban people, as well as land-based managers. So I have something to start this conversation with, which is I've been teaching the holistic decision making as a fully declared non-accredited professional. And beg your pardon? And
loose cannon.
A loose cannon, yeah. But I have three reactions, and I want to start this conversation with these three reactions. The first one, very common, is it's too hard to be applied on a daily basis in all of our decisions. That's the first, maybe the most recurrent comment that I receive. The second one is from people, usually academics or well-read people, that they think they understand holistic decision making because they have some idea or even a very good background on holism or some sort of systems thinking or holistic thinking. So the second comment is sort of, I know what you're talking about. I already do that. And then I go like, you don't. And then the third one, which was the reaction that I had when I first heard Helen Savory's TED Talk, I think it was in 2014 or 13. I said, there's something there that I understand. It is very important that I can't quite grasp now. And so this third comment that I've received every now and then are usually from the people that will actually spend time reading or trying to adopt the tool and that sort of stuff. So three comments. Can you talk to me about why people find so difficult to actually adopt this framework of decision making? That was a very long-winded introduction. I'm sorry.
That was. Those are the exact same things that I come across, and the one that worries me the most is people. The second one is people saying, "Oh yeah, I know this. It's similar to systems thinking or holistic thinking," and it's not. It's the difference between thinking holistically and acting holistically, and it's entirely new thinking because we're not genetically designed or able to manage the complexity that we are all managing in our lives. So it takes a bit of effort. And when people say it's hard, it's not hard at all. It's very simple. But it takes a bit of effort to get used to making decisions in a different context.
Can I rephrase what you're saying as it's not difficult, it just needs to be trained until it becomes second nature?
Yeah.
It's sort of the okay. So let's keep on this sort of cohort of people that think it's difficult to adopt the decision making framework on a daily basis. For regular people, what can we do to because it's actually very counterintuitive for me, because we actually live in a way that we cannot be cut off from the dimensions, from the ecological, from the social dimensions. But we've been trained in a society that is so deep into consumerism and making money that we run our daily basis on the assumption that the economical or the economic part of things is always more important. When in fact, all of the problems that we have, or most of them, are caused by the fact that we've been neglecting other dimensions. We need more time together. We need more time to just be, and we need more time with nature, in nature, being nature. Does that make sense? But
it makes sense, but what you're talking about there, sorry, carry on.
What I'm trying to get at is, on our daily basis then, how can we then incorporate the social and ecological dimensions that we've been trained not to look at them? How can we then put this into our decision framework?
So I'm gonna reverse quite far from that, because we're not trained not to look at them. We genetically don't look at them because we didn't have them. So for over 2 million years, we've been basing our decisions on the context of our needs, our desires, or to solve a problem. And once our technology started to get more sophisticated, which is where you're talking about to this day, once that started to get more sophisticated, it changed our social behavior. So then our actions and our decisions were having an impact on our environment because we weren't behaving naturally within our ecosystems. And fast forward to today, look at how technology has changed our entire lives, our societies, our cultures, everything we do, it's completely changed. And the way we make decisions is still a 2 million year old process that is not working in today's world at all. So what we have to do is change the context of our decisions from a very basic need, desire, or to address a problem, because that's what we can break all our decisions down to, is those three contexts. And we need a much more profound context that includes those dimensions that you're talking about, our social, our cultural, and our environmental, because all our decisions for the last 2 million years, our past actions, are what are creating these knock-on consequences that we're dealing with today. So, and our values and our livelihoods are entirely tied to the health of our environment. So the more our environment is failing, the more our livelihoods and our values and our cultures and our economies are going to suffer. Does that make sense?
We have a causality sort of, not disagreement, but we have a different perspective in causality. We've been talking about this before, but just to a comment on top of what you're saying, we have had traditional cultures in which the cosmology or the context of their decision or their relationship with land is, we inherited this piece of nature from our ancestors. We need to behave like guardians of this place and all these functions, and we need to deliver it to our descendants. So in many traditional cultures, I would say with a good degree of potential to devastation, they still don't cause that much damage because they have this frame or this context. Have they evolved? Or it's just that because they have a context that is stronger than the Western society, than most people in Western society?
So that's where I'll say my side of thinking on that is, so we have these more traditional cultures that still exist, and they're not using as sophisticated forms of technology. So their decision making is damaging the land slower, because their social structure hasn't changed as much as ours has to this. If you fast forward to a huge advance in technology in the last 100 years, but those areas, and also it depends on their life supporting environment, on the brittleness scale where they are, which will speed up or slow down environmental degradation. So, sorry, excuse me, dog. Shut up. Hey. So it's still the same. It's reductionist decision making, because because they might be thinking about their land and the future of the land, but with the technology advancing, they're not thinking about the social aspects and the economic aspects simultaneously. So their societies are still changing, and their decisions are still reducing themselves to not evolving with that change. So that's my side of it.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I sort of still think about like whether they have got a different context, which I think that's the case, that makes them behave in a different way, because we have had other civilizations, complex or not, that haven't degraded as much as we do. I understand what you're saying, like the degree of devastation is directly linked to our use of fossil fuels and technology and so on and so forth. I understand that, and I agree with that. But I have seen traditional people refusing the use of some facilities or technologies because they actually have a stronger connection and context in some way. So I sort of, I haven't made up my mind about this one, but I think they actually have a better context because their culture,
definitely, because they still have ecological intelligence.
Yeah.
So they know that the health of their land, their health depends on the health of the land, but they're not tying that. They're looking at it there, but they're not tying it together at the point of their decisions. So they will still be causing environmental damage and social damage and economic damage, but not as fast as other people. So it's just tying that. It's we can look at that. Many people have looked at that and probably slowed down their demise because they're thinking about that, and they know that there's a connection between their health and the health of their land, but they're not tying it together at the point of the decision, which would in fact stop that destruction completely and bring about the lives they want. So they're just basically what do you call it, like I can't think of the word because I'm not very awake today, but they're, what is it called? Slowing down the inevitable. What's the proper English? Anyway.
You asked me what the proper English is. I don't know. Yeah, but I get the feeling.
Prolonging the inevitable.
Prolonging, which is the same word in Portuguese, by the way. It's always like that. When I can't find a word, it's very similar. Okay, let's park that. I want to come back and talk about the positive knock-on effects of tying all of our dimensions at the point of our decisions. But let's park it. I want to talk about this. But let's park it. Because you mentioned the brittleness scale, and something that we haven't covered in our previous conversation is the 4 insights. Can you sort of go about the 4 insights, and then I'll probably sort of comment on what I think it's sort of important and can help people understand them as well.
Well, the first insight is holism, is that nature only functions in wholes and patterns. There are no parts in nature. So when you make a decision, so if we talk about social, environmental, and economic complexity that we're all managing, we can't make a decision for any of those 3 aspects because that's the complexity of the whole, and only the whole is reality.
Yeah.
So that's the first insight, and that's how the holistic decision-making process came about, so that when we make our decisions and we're all operating in that web of complexity every day, all the time, and our decisions are affecting, if they're affecting one of those, they're affecting all of those aspects in this web of complexity that we'll never understand. I think, but luckily we don't have to understand it. We have to respect it and align our decisions.
Yeah, we have
to align us with those holes and patterns.
Yeah.
So our decisions need to be aligned with the holes and patterns of that web of complexity.
I like what you say, in the sense that we don't need to fully understand the web of complexity, but we need to acknowledge, and we need to acknowledge that because we don't know the full extent of this complexity, we need to be much more respectful. And when I talk about these things, I have to, or I always feel inclined to tell people the limitations of the scientific method, because we have replaced the spiritual side of our civilizations, because to think that people who believe in spirituality are primitive people is also a very Eurocentric view, and a very Western view. To have an understanding of nature that puts a spirit in everything in nature, it's much closer to this web of complexity than what science does, because what science does is an arbitrary cut in time and space. So let's say we study some ecological relationships, and we say, I'm going to study the relationship of this tree with that bird. And we have many studies that are like that. So the space maybe is the area around the tree, and maybe, and the time is like the relationship of the bird with that tree. But the bird will interact with, I don't know how many more things, and the tree's got connections to the living soil, so on and so forth. So I find it very interesting that two things. One is that when we should be respecting science, we are not. We have hard science telling us we are coming to an end, and we don't respect that science. And when we shouldn't be listening too much to arbitrary cuts like of time and space, we actually do that a lot. So we think we know too much, but we don't know that much. So I like that insight that nature operates in wholes and patterns, because it brings us to that rhythm and to that understanding, not the full grasp of understanding, but to that understanding that the web that supports us is much, much, much wider than we can actually grasp. It brings it brings yeah, it brings humility.
It's incredible. So, and that's what I say, like we will never even begin to understand it, not even close. We've got to understand that it's there, and we are a part of it. We're not just separate, we are a part of it, because my body is a whole organism, but it's not a whole, because this cannot none of my cells, and I'm made up of billions of different parts, trillions, however many, I don't know, and my relationship, I can't survive without green plants growing on regenerating soils, so I can't ever operate independently of the whole that I am living within. I have to eat. Where does the food come from? Comes from the soil. But when we look at that complexity, so it's so our environment, our societies, and our values and our livelihoods are tied so closely to our environment. So that web of complexity, think of that web not just in your daily life, but in globally. That means billions of humans, billions of animals, trillions of insects, trees, plants, soil, economies. I mean, that's the web of complexity you're talking about. How can you ever understand it? You talk about a tree and a bird. There's how many 8 billion microorganisms in a handful of healthy soil. That's how many billions of organisms are in that soil below that tree. You can't even comprehend that. So don't try to. Just know that it's absolutely fascinating, but you can't study. It's like me knowing everything about the tree and the bird, or me knowing everything about hydrogen and oxygen, and those make up water, but you'd have no idea of how water functions. So we have to respect it and align ourselves with that complexity with our decision making.
And I still talk to people about this, and I have a deep respect for science, because I think it's still a much valid way to try and build up our knowledge about things, but we just need to use it with that sensibility that it's actually something very arbitrary. Like the other day, I was talking to an agronomist in Brazil, Dr. Walter Stenbock. He's written some of the most important books in succession agroforestry in Brazil. And he said something very beautiful. He said, well, when, I can't remember what was Copernicus or Galileo, which was, anyway, one of these two, one of these two, they came up with they calculated the orbits of the planets and the distance of the planets and all that sort of stuff using technology. And then he says something very interesting, which is, okay, at that night, because of the use of technology and science, it was possible to calculate the distances and the orbits and all that sort of stuff. But he had to take away from that event the smell of the night, the sound of the crickets, the air that was, the breeze that was coming through, and those sorts. And I found that very beautiful, because it is true. Like we needed science to get to that discovery. But at that point, how many more things we had to take out of the equation in order to explain that in that way. And I'm not saying we shouldn't explain things in this way. What I'm saying is we need to understand that when we explain things in this way, we are cutting off many dimensions of that event or whatever that we're studying. And I found it very enlightening the way he put it, because then you need to come back to that experience in which we are fully present. And then maybe we can't calculate all of those distances, but we can experience that night and in a different way. So both are valid, and we just need to be careful. Anyway, I'm just drifting off. Second insight, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say with Galileo, and that he might have used technology and science to discover that, but he discovered it because he was thinking differently. And then my dad uses Diego. My dad uses that a lot, because he was ridiculed by they tried to put him in jail for his because it was a paradigm shift in how human beings think. And that's what we're asking human beings to do again now, is to go from a reductionist mechanistic worldview where we're entirely reliant on technology and we think it's going to solve everything. But you can't solve biological problems with technology. You can only solve biological problems biologically. And so now we're shifting from a mechanistic reductionist worldview to a holistic regenerative worldview. And this is a big shift in the whole of humanity. It's the shift that we have to make. And the way we make it is to change how we make our decisions, so that we are addressing that web of complexity and coming back into bringing ourselves back into alignment with those holes and patterns that we exist within. And then using the things we make are not self-organizing, they're not complex, but we will know where and when to use them, because right now we don't. We just use them. Like we just rely on that. So this way of thinking will bring us back into balance with everything, because of course we need technology for years to come. We're going to need fossil fuels. Those problems will be easy to solve because they're complicated and not complex. Anything we make just does what we tell it to do. But the things we manage, we're managing within this web of complexity of holes and patterns all the time.
Yeah.
So we have to change our decision making to align us with that, with every decision we make, which it's not at the moment. That's what's causing all these knock-on effects across the world.
And talking about patterns, back then he was persecuted by the church, and today, whoever breaks through belief systems or scientific mainstream thinking burns as well. They used to burn people, but today, if you come with something that goes against the prevailing scientific view, you're burnt. You can't find jobs. So my dad for 60 years has been banned from
university campuses, from all sorts of things, because what happens is individuals can pick it up, the new thinking, but organizations will prevail with the prevailing beliefs of society. They're not necessarily scientific facts, they're beliefs that have become reality. And all our organizations now in the world, this is why we're having such a problem and why we have to break through at organizational level, is they take on a life of their own and they lead. So if you go into any organization in the world now, you'll find the top computers, the top technology, but they'll have complete environmental illiteracy. They won't have any ecological literacy, as even the big environmental organizations have total ecological illiteracy. Yep. In the way they manage, because they're not managing the holes and patterns that they're existing within. So that's and the throughout history, if you look at all of history, organizations have led the ridicule when somebody comes up with a new idea, and led the pushback, not individuals. Yep. Because an individual doesn't think, an organization doesn't think like an individual. So
it's a bureaucracy, yeah. But my point is that even what we materialize in the world respects the fact that there's got a rhythm. So you see, with the bureaucracies today, they're not different from the church in the past. So I'm just pointing out, yeah. So
it's all reductionist decision making, in that I know you're trying to get me to the second insight. I'm still on this one. So when we form that organization, it's because we're using reductionist decision making, and we're dividing those organizations up into parts, manageable parts. And remember, in an organization, there is no manageable part separate to the whole, because only the whole is reality, because it's a self-organizing system. So we divide it up into parts, and literally the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So all the people in the organization are good people, but the decisions and policies that come out of the organization will lack any common sense. They will be inhumane, because an organization also can't be held accountable for anything that it does like a human being. So it doesn't matter how many people they kill, doesn't matter how much money they spend, doesn't matter, they cannot be held accountable like an individual can. So that's the other thing. So it doesn't matter really what they do at the end of the day. And what will happen because of this paradigm shift in how we make decisions is, when anything threatens the organization, or they perceive it as a threat, they will circle the wagons and protect the organization and go against their very mission, their mission statement, or whatever it is. So we always use the example of the Catholic Church, of the priests. They've known about priests abusing kids for many, many years, but they've circled the wagon, protected the Catholic Church and the priests, and not the children. And that's not because individuals are bad, it's because the organization has taken on a life of its own and will.
I have something to say about this, and I haven't lost my train of thought, which is, and we've been talking about this as well in the context of how to spread change and how to educate. We've been talking about this before, and I just want to say that there's a I think he's a professor at the New York University. His name is Clay Shirky. He wrote a book that's called "Here Comes Everybody," and it's about the use of the internet and how it changes the behavior. Let me put it in a better way. He talks about how when we change the way we communicate, we change the way we behave. In that book, he explains very clearly that when we circle a problem, and another metaphor for this is when we create an institution to resolve a problem, which is one of our three decision-making contexts: a need, a desire, and a problem. We create an institution. The mission of the institution comes second, because the survival of the institution needs to come first, because we have overheads. We need to pay the bills, we need to pay the rent, we need to pay employees, we need that sort of stuff. But he explains very very elegantly how we get lost. But there is another possibility of organizing things. And then there's a guy from Brazil, he died recently. His name is Osvaldo Oliveira. And he was an economist, and he changed the way he was dealing with the economy. And he started talking about the distributed networks, which is something that Clay Shirky talks about in the context of the use of the internet, because it's all decentralized. So we are still trying to foster change, to foment adoption of new frameworks or approaches or whatever you want to call them. But when we do that, we fall back to old ways of teaching and old ways of spreading the message, which is through institutions. And that is a problem in our age, because everyone is, especially younger people, they are used to the fact that everything is distributed. So we need to offer the knowledge in these different ways as well. And there's a good side of this is that we don't need institutions as much as we needed in the past. I'm not saying we don't need them, but we need them way less than we needed in the past. And that's not fully, we haven't fully grasped this change yet, especially because we're not millennials. We're not the youngest ones anymore. But anyway. Oi.
We just need institutions to be managing differently, and then they won't come up with these reductionist policies that are destroying us. But no institution has ever led change. The institutions will only change when enough of us, just the general public, are talking about something. And that's why with this useful social media things where we can get messages out to more people is going to come in handy. And then we have to put pressure on the institutions. But it's like people like Greta Thunberg and the youth saying, you got to do something about climate change, but no institution can do anything because they don't know what to do. So that's the thing. So if we can get the youth understanding that it all comes down to reducing that web of complexity to our needs, desires, or problems, and just changing that context to a holistic context where we're aligning ourselves and our policies and our decisions with that web of complexity and with those patterns, and not separating anything that cannot be separated without affecting something else, then we'll be able to then the youth will go and put pressure on institutions to change. As soon as they've put pressure on institutions to change, not just change a policy or change the thing, change their management frameworks, then we'll be looking at a very different picture. So that's exciting if we can get through.
I want to come back to this when we talk about the positive knock-on effects of having our decisions tied up with all those three dimensions at the decision point. I haven't lost that, but I want to come back to the second insight, which is
read your chat. The second insight that made holistic management possible is that all environments in the world can be classified on a scale of call it brittleness. So it depends how humidity is distributed throughout the year. So non-brittle is environments that are humid throughout the year, to very brittle, which is environments that have long periods of dry spells with very little humidity. And this insight was at either end of that scale, the environments respond very differently to the same influences. So what was discovered, for example, is that allowing land to rest restores it in non-brittle or humid environments, but it damages it in very brittle environments. So that was a very important insight that a lot of people had actually missed.
Yep. I think one of the things I like this this insight of the Brittner scale for a few reasons, but one of them I think is the most important one, which is we have developed the biology of conservation in a way that we think that to preserve an area, we need not to interfere with it. And I think that pushes us even further from our position of being part of nature. So the Brittner scale for me is important in the sense that when I'm planning a farm or I'm planning to restore an area, and I understand where I am in that sort of scale, I know that I need to interfere more or less in that area. Anyway, I just find it very, very useful in the sense that most urban people, especially urban people, they still think that if we do not interfere with nature, nature will be restored. And that doesn't hold water anymore once we learn this. At least doesn't hold water at all in some parts of the planet because they are very dry. Sorry. We have Helen Lewis with us. Hello, Helen. How are you?
Hi, Rico. Hi, Sarah.
Say hello quickly in English.
So
we back at my glasses.
You're so gorgeous. Hello, how are you?
Thank you. Hi, don't take my glasses.
Helen, we've been talking about the feedback that we get from people trying to adopt holistic decision making. We are now covering the 4 insights, and to hopefully after that talk about we have parked that context, which is what is going to happen when we have people tying up the ecological, economic, and social dimension at the point of decision. What will be then the positive knock-on effects in society if we have that happening? But we're just covering the Brittner scale now, so welcome. You're welcome to.
Yes, thanks. That's good.
Share your insights with us.
Yeah, so the brittleness, I guess you may have covered it, but I always think it's actually just so valuable because it sets the scene of what the consequences are of the tools that we apply, the management tools on land will be. So if you're high on the brittleness scale, then as you were saying earlier, the locking up of land and moving towards the desert and things like that, you actually that locking up of land is actually detrimental to land over time. Certainly sometimes, and I know in Australia we can lock up some country and it sort of looks like it's recovered in about 2 or 3 years, but then after that it deteriorates quite quickly, and within another 5 years it's just like a desert of trees and there's nothing living in it. And state forests are a classic example of that. So I think, and obviously if you're a non-brittle, then you can lock up country and it does restore. So it's a very good, the scale of brittleness is excellent because it does determine what some of the consequences of the variety of all the management tools in the toolbox actually consequences will be.
Yeah, and also I just want to add to that. The work that's been done in Brazil with agroforestry systems, one of the main researchers and one of the main drivers of this movement in Brazil, he's got quite a famous small video in which he explains that even in the areas in Brazil in which we have the rainforests in the coast of Brazil, they've been so degraded that the succession cannot pass the point of 15-20 years. So all of the plants that live about 15-20 years thrive and then die without complexifying the system enough to support the next generation or the next iteration of succession. So we have come to a point of degradation that even in non-brittle areas, the succession is being severely hindered by degradation. It's actually anyway. just to add to that.
Yeah.
And Sarah said something that I think it's worth it going or maybe exploring it a bit more, which is we have the evidence of past civilizations that collapse in semi-arid places, and you can't find them. They are on the deserts. Whereas we go to Central America or other non-brittle areas, and the remains of past civilizations are actually covered on the trees.
Yeah.
So we actually have that in the back of our minds, but we just didn't sort of piece it together. Yeah.
And
that's right. And also, you know, Australia is a classic example in a way that it's all our farming knowledge actually came from non-brittle environments, and the tools were then management tools then applied into a brittle environment exactly the same way as they would have applied them in their non-brittle environment. And you know, our history or our current state of play in Australia is evidence that the tools are okay, but they're just applied in a you know, they need tweaking to actually suit our brittle tending environment.
You're saying, Sarah, sorry.
Yeah. No, I was going to say it's a good time to bring in the third key insight. I think because it's going to just continue the conversation a bit. Is the third key insight is that in the brittle environments, the third key insight is that those environments develop with big numbers of herding animals, of large herding animals that were kept bunched together and on the move by their pack hunting, in the presence of pack hunting predators. And the fact that that movement is absolutely vital to the health of the land, which we have up until more recently believed that they destroyed. So that's the other counterintuitive sort of new insight, is that land in brittle environments has to have large herding animals correctly moving in order to keep them alive. And that's why rest is not the tool to use, or conservation is not the tool to use in brittle environments, but it can work in humid environments. And we can go into that a little bit more, I think. Yeah,
I think just to say that anyway, I think that by conservation biology, it's doomed not to work, because it comes from the assumption that if we interact with a system, it's going to be in a degrading way. So the third one, like you're saying, anyway, I think my point is we need to understand that we can act as a positive driver of change in all of the spectrums of the scale, and in environments as well. So I get a lot in Brazil, people saying, well, in Brazil we don't have pack hunting animals and we don't have large herds of herbivore. In more recent times, I spoke to like Bushmen in Brazil, and they say, well, we used to have herds of deer that were huge. We don't see them anymore. And this is not that far, not that long ago. But there's another thing in South America that's different, which is we don't know how the megafauna was extinct, because in North America, in Europe, we know we had some big events and meteors and things like that. In Brazil, we didn't have them. But the plants we have today, the fauna we have today is the same, that sort of similarly very close to what we had 5,000 years ago. And 5,000 years ago in Brazil, we had a huge megafauna with huge herbivores, and they're no longer there, and we don't know what happened to them. So what we think was a pristine environment when we have record of might actually have been already degraded a lot, which has got to do with what you're saying. Yeah,
it's been degrading for millions of years, but it was slow. So it was slow degradation of our land for millions of years, and then as our technology, look at the last 100 years of our technology advancing at the same speed that's advanced, our everything we manage, our natural world, and which is only humans and nature, it's all collapsing. And that's because our decision-making process is, like I said, not aligning us with the holes and patterns that we operate within. So I'm just going to quickly bring in the fourth insight so that we can just then continue the conversation, which is that in any environment, overgrazing and damage from trampling would, I've written it down because I'm just tired today, bear little relationship to the number of animals, but rather to the amount of time that the plants and soils are exposed to the animals. So it's nothing to do with the numbers of animals themselves. It's to do with the timing and impact of those animals, which in nature was kept perfect by the pack hunting predators. They kept the herds bunched together and on the move, aerating the soil with their hooves, trampling down the old grass, fertilizing it with dung and urine to form this perfect protective mulch over the soil to protect it. And then when it rains, the rain falls into the soil, sinks through the roots into our underground water systems. And then, so the tools we were applying were burning or conservation, which we now know both cause damage in brittle environments. So and the reason we started burning was because we knocked off so many species of herding animals and upset the balance of them with their pack hunting predators. And so in order to clear that old grass, we started burning it. So we replaced the role of animals with fire. That's a reductionist decision because we didn't think of the knock-on consequences, and that's caused more and more bare ground. And the same, even if we leave it to rest and that grass is left standing every year, the sunlight can't reach the growth points of the roots of the plants. So you have to have that animal impact to get those plants down, trigger the growth, get the sunlight onto the roots of the plants, etc.
Yes, because I mean, in a brittle turning environment, grasses don't defoliate themselves. They rely on being grazed, and we actually require, the only tool we have available to keep the decay process a living process with the moisture it requires is in the gut of the animal, which is based on the herding animals. And so they can put the manure back on the soil, the critters can take it underground, feed the soil, feed the plants, and the cycle continues. But the grazing animal is the only tool we've got available to complete that decay process. So it is actually, as you're saying, it's critical we have livestock in a brittle turning environment to look after our grasslands and savannas. And I guess the predator-prey relationship too, just to go back to that, I think it's broader than, the predator-prey, absolutely, of moving animals and moving animals on and the prey, the natural prey. But it's also, even now, even in cropping, the predator-prey relationship of actually having ladybugs to eat the Heliothis moths in cotton, or, feeding the predator so that they actually take care of the bug. It's complementary planting, it's bees in rock melons crops, it's all those things that makes a huge difference. And it's the predator-prey relationship that is at play. And if we use that more broadly and we fed predators, more regularly and made it more attractive for them to be in that place, then we'd actually have a far less need for chemicals, far less, all those things just start to be, they're just band-aids of a deeper root cause, which is usually lack of diversity. So, and a predator-prey relationship allows you to increase that diversity.
Yeah, I like that. And sorry, I just wanted to quickly, when Helen said about the moisture in the ruminant's guts, that's basically where, so in brittle environments that have no humidity, that's where they get the moisture that they have to have. Yes. Whereas in humid environments, because there's always moisture, microorganisms and the different animals that those environments developed with, which are smaller bugs and beetles and stuff like that, can always remain active and biologically breaking down the soil.
If you look at it, that's right. In the calendar of events, you've got a whole year worth of throughout the whole year. There's births and deaths all year in a non-brittle environment. In a brittle turning environment, you've got seasonal growth and then seasonal deaths, and those are and that's that's the difference, because at that point, that's where we need the moisture to keep that process going. Yeah, as you were saying. So yeah, I think that's
at this point with this insight. I just wanted to bridge perspectives. There's a very sort of a fast-growing movement in Brazil of the succession agroforestry movement, which I think is just amazing. And I like to explain to people, because it's heavily based on covering soil and a lot of pruning or chopping and dropping. There are other, how can I say, there are other perspectives of this movement, which is the time dimension in succession, the space dimension in stratification, and the interconnection dimension in terms of what do you plant with what. They have very sort of useful breakthroughs in the understanding of the agroforestry movement. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is people understood in that movement the need for human interaction as a megafauna animal that comes and prunes a lot to cover soil. And I like to explain to people that in brittle environments or brittle tanning environments, grass plants evolved with the need for pruning, but that's the herbivore. And unless we want to be the ones pruning grasses as well, we need to integrate more animals in the agroforestry movement as well, because the interspace of the interroles in the agroforestry movement or approach, they're usually planted to grasses, African grasses, because they are very fast growing in most areas in Brazil. So they produce a lot of biomass to biologically decay on top of the tree rows in which people are planting not only trees, but also veggies and other things, which is the breakthrough. One of the breakthroughs of the movement is to use succession in all of its stages to produce food from the beginning. So these similarities, they go across board, but people just don't think about them. So there are many links, even between brittle and non-brittle environments. We just need to understand what's the principle or the ecological principle behind that function. Okay, so we covered the four insights. And just before you came, Helen, we were talking about what would happen. So let me just recap then. And Sarah agrees with this. We have usually three feedbacks on talking about holistic decision making. And they are, it's too difficult to apply on a daily basis. That's very common. Some people who think they've got it because they have some background on systems thinking or some sort of alternative or holistic or new age approach. And then as soon as you say holistic, they go like, I get it. And then we're talking about how usually the ones who say, I get it first are the ones who are far from getting it. Usually, not always. And then we sort of spent some time trying to understand why it's taking so long to catch up and why people think it's so hard. So we then parked a comment from Sarah, which was, she was about to explain what would happen if we tied all of the three dimensions at the decision point. And then as maybe provoking some comments from both of you, what would you see? What changes would you both would see in society if we would then have the three dimensions at the point of our decisions from now on?
Well, I think I think the values-based decision making would enable people to have clarity about what they value and what's important to them, and then also the confidence to make decisions, because there's a knowing that comes with actually having your holistic context clear, and then there's so you get confidence, and then there's a sense of calm, because your life stops being such big fluctuations. It actually starts being, I mean, I just think from a personal perspective, you know, we often find that we ups and downs in life, and I just feel, and they can be quite high and quite low. But I just think that, I mean, my personal experience with managing holistically is it's just provided an even keel in life, which is a much better feeling than having to deal with highs and lows. So that, I mean, that, and a personal thing, and then, as you know, a flood starts with a raindrop, and I just feel that if individuals can grab hold of understanding their values, and then using the testing questions, or using their context for the reference point, and then running the questions through towards that, or ideas towards their context with the questions. I think that's you know, and the questions of, you know, really your head, your heart, the future, the present, the root cause, and society, you know, people, environment, and prosperity. So you know, those 7 sort of areas are really key, and they give you that clarity that you're looking for, and rippling into wider community. I mean, we had a conversation on the weekend with some friends about, you know, in a political system, if a political party actually came up with a context for the country that they're serving, and actually the values attached to that, and made decisions towards it rather than to egos and agendas, there'd be so much more progress and in line with what the community actually wanted. So I believe that there's some real opportunity there. It certainly it would reinstate a very transparent version of democracy, which, you know, at this point in time, people are probably quite attracted to, given the situation in the world today. So I think long term, I think, and over, like, and quite simply, in existing democracies, it could be easily instigated and implemented. So Sarah, I'm sure you've got some comments from the African perspective.
I want to park something, Helen. Sorry, I want to park something, and this is going to go to both of you as well, which is about the planning of our wealth in terms of the holistic financial planning. I just want to park that and let Sarah explore the positive knock-on effects of having decision making like that. But then I want to talk about socioeconomic perspectives in a global way. Anyway, sorry, Sarah. Sarah, so Helen is saying that could be easily adopted in democracies if we had like a decision making that's based on values, which in some ways, and she said that as well, in other words, is if we communicate our values, we're creating a context for the decision making. I still sort of, I've got a lot of this feedback that it's really difficult to implement. So anyway, what do you see in this context of facilitating the adoption and the positive knock-on effects that we could have in doing so?
Well, the positive knock-on effects we'd see from an individual, perspective of people making decisions that tie their values and their livelihoods to the health of their environment would be just them always making decisions that would take the health of the environment into consideration and make it of utmost importance, because they cannot have their values or livelihoods without that. So they can't have the life that they want to live without having healthy environment. So the knock-on effects would be much better decisions, consumer decisions across the board, and they would be testing whether those things they buy, because with almost every single financial transaction human beings make, they are affecting the environment somewhere in the world at some point. So that's quite a big thing to get your head around. And basically the knock-on effects of having holistic context and operating within those holes and patterns that we were talking about earlier, and respecting that all our decisions for any of those things in isolation will cause knock-on effects, like we are doing now, towards our needs, problems, or desires. If we had a holistic context and we're respecting those patterns, we would automatically be having the reverse knock-on effects to what we're having now. So we would have positive impact on the environment, which would have positive impact on our values and our economies, because every economy on the planet and every society on the planet relies on healthy soil. And then, yes, Helen, you're absolutely right. If it should be easy to get it into governments and democracies, but because of paradigm paralysis and institutional stupidity, it's not easy. So we have to push.
I guess. Sorry, when I was saying it was easy, I guess there's no legislative, change required. Like in Australia, there's no legislative. There's no impediments for actually someone just deciding to actually change the way the decisions are made. Even in Parliament in Australia, the second reading of every bill could actually be an electorate conscience vote, and that is then checked towards the context for Australia. And that, those are the things that we can easily do. And we have a free vote as part of a process, the process in Parliament in Australia. And so the actual processes and mechanisms are well and truly in place, and it's simply a desire. It's simply an understanding of the value of it, and then the desire to actually make the change. So and which is of course more difficult.
And
so that's right.
That's what we've got to do. Our job is to get enough of the public understanding this at policy level, and then what we only have to focus on for now, initially, is an agricultural policy that will change. Because almost the whole world or whole countries are involved in agriculture. Agriculture is crop production,
it's food.
It's livestock, it's fiber, it's land, waters, forestries, wildlife. So it's pretty much the whole planet is involved in agriculture. And right now our agricultural policies are destroying civilization because of this exact same decision-making process when we develop policies, which we just have to apply that same decision-making process to that whole complex system of patterns.
I guess, ultimately, if we could just simply understand, if everyone just agreed on the fact that how nature functions with the water cycle, mineral cycle, energy flow, and diversity, and if we understood that was paramount, and it is what provides us with life, and those 4 ecosystem functions cannot operate in isolation, and if we reduce one, we reduce all of them. And so then understanding then the consequences of the tools in the toolbox to those particular 4 functions is actually where the policy changes, and that's where we'll get the change on the ground. But coming from the other angle as well, as you said before, consumers and their dollar, absolutely. I mean, given that everything that we eat or consume or use comes from the earth at some point in its life cycle, every time people buy something, they're supporting the way in which it was produced, and I think the consumers, that consumer dollar and the understanding of that, it actually reinstates the household. And going on to what Eureka was wanting to talk about, it goes on to reinstate the household as the core to the economy, which is actually what it was originally. And that's what the original Latin root of economy is household, and management of the household. And every household absolutely makes an impact. I mean, you just have to look at the 2020 loo paper crisis. That actually is a classic example of consumer-driven change. And they've caused a shortage of loo paper. And you think, well, if we all then chose to support regeneratively produced food instead, there'd be massive practice change. And so, consumers need to acknowledge that they have got the power to make the change, right? And their demand.
I want to make a few provocations in a few. They all related to the consumerist society. I have a problem with this. I'm not disagreeing with the power of our dollars. What I'm saying is when we only think this way, we don't question the game. We only try to improve our role within a consumerist society, which brings me back to the wealth planning of holistic management and to what Sarah was saying, that we can only grow economies in regenerating soils. And I have a few comments. First of is, The same way we need everyone using the holistic management framework to understand ecology, we need everyone understanding economy. We cannot have a growing economy for the whole planet. If everyone manages holistically, but everyone wants the same gadgets that farmers in first world countries have, we can't sustain. We cannot have everyone in the planet living with the living standards of the middle class of Australia, the US, and some European countries. So if we go about setting our holistic context, aiming for a standard of life that is based upon developed countries, we are doomed to fail. We cannot produce this many iPhones, this many TVs, this many cars, so on and so forth. So I have a problem with the assumption that everything will fall into its place, because it's not as easy. It's not that easy. What I'm trying to say is this: from one end, we need everyone to understand ecosystem processes. On the other end, we need people to understand that a growth economy is just not possible in a finite planet.
I think, Eureka, what will happen, if people actually do understand the ecosystem processes and the consequences of their decisions on the ecosystem, and the fact that everything they buy is a reflection of, actually has a ripple effect back towards how it was produced and where it was produced and how, who produced it. I think that the actual options, then there's a whole opportunity that is probably an underdeveloped part of our economy, and it's basically what's old is new again, and that is the repair, reuse, recycle economy, which is actually not fully functioning. It's certainly not transparent or trusted right now, but I think that's where there's a new growth potential in that space. And also I think that when people actually get down to their core values and they also understand so they're bringing the people together in that common ground, and then they're actually also understanding the impact on the environment. I believe the outcome of their decisions, like the new car and all those things, start to actually go further down the list of necessities. And I think there's a whole shift in headspace. And so we don't actually end up just promoting a growth economy, which is ultimately, why do we need to have a growing economy? Let's just have one that's robust. Let's have a robust economy instead that can actually manage and go with an adaptable and nimble economy rather than, growing economy. I mean, Japan hasn't grown for a decade and they're fine. Like, they're still going all right. So those are the things. I think the growth, headspace is one that I think we're moving on from. So yeah, I think there's an opportunity there. I just think there's some options we've got.
I agree with you. I would like to comment a few things, but I know what Sarah is going to talk. I know what she's going to say, which is if the decision is holistic, that won't be a problem. I know that I know this is going to say something like this.
I'm going to say that. Wait, but I'm going to say more. So go tell me what you're going to say.
So my comment is just in the sense that we need to have, and I was talking to Sarah about this before we started recording today. We need to unpack the energy literacy from the ecological literacy, and we need to talk a lot more about these two, energy literacy and ecological literacy. Because if we don't do that, if we don't teach people about thermodynamics and how our production systems usually, not always, but very mostly go from a low entropy system to a high entropy system, if we don't educate people about this, we are doomed to fail. Because people can have perfect holistic context, and if they don't understand that they cannot aim for a consumerist lifestyle, we're doomed. The same way we're doomed if they don't understand the ecosystem processes. Anyway, that I've got this very sort of political sort of background from this view, and I understand things will fall into their places, but we need to do our homework, which is to educate people about energy literacy, ecological literacy, and holistic decision making. I think they go together. Anyway, I'm sorry, Sarah, you go, because I know you can. You ready?
My first thing that I was going to say is nobody's ever going to do it perfectly, and we can't expect everyone to do it. But what we do have to do is get it into organizations so that the big decisions are being made in a regenerative way. But if we have our holistic context, when we learn holistic management, so we have to learn it in some depth for individuals, is we learn that we cannot have any growing economy. Our economy is about to crash and burn globally, every single economy, because our life supporting environment is crashing and burning. So when you have a holistic context, you're making people look at what they're doing for themselves. You're making people test that their decisions will be leading them towards that context all the time. And no, they're not going to do every decision, because some people have different ways of doing things or whatever. But in general, if we could have everybody operating towards that web of complexity and taking it into consideration in their lives, we will literally change the world. And you don't have to teach them about, you need to teach them why life supporting environment is so important. But the other things, the technological things, all of that will fall into place as soon as you've got that context, because they're going to be testing those decisions and finding out for themselves what the best decision is and what will be leading them to or from their context.
Yeah, that's right. And given that one of the questions is about energy use and source, and money use and source, it means that the energy question is well and truly, is actually they're asked to think about that, as well as the impact on the environment and their future that they've got planned for themselves. So I think it's that's right. So I think the energy issue is covered within the questions as well. It provokes thought, at least,
we're going to come back to this. So if for those listening to this conversation, we intend to record on all the specific issues in the this holistic management framework. But just to comment on what Sarah was saying, I come from a very anarchist sort of perspective, in which I prefer to prepare, to rely on myself, be resilient, be interdependent, and to a degree self-sufficient, in order to have more room to negotiate with the sort of the macro politics. But what you're saying, and I agree with you, we need to push change in management, in institutions, and this is urgent. There is an indigenous leadership in Brazil, and he was actually talking about it. He said the middle class pursuit for a sustainable lifestyle is a selfish one. And then he goes on developing this rationale, which is, if we fix everything we need to fix in our realm of middle class, we do not amount to 30% of the environmental problems. There is still over 70% of the impact that comes from bureaucracies, governments, corporations. So in a way, we've passed the point of thinking only about the households, and we've passed the point of thinking only about the macro politics or ideologies. We actually need to tackle both of them at the same time, and obviously fomenting and nurturing those with the inclination to do that. So some people are more towards, macro like scenarios, and that's fine. Like Sarah's work with developing policies and that sort of stuff, holistic policy. We need to do that, because actually corporations are responsible for over 70% of the degradation. So even if we fix all of the farms, all of the middle class, this is only 30%. So, and we don't have time anymore. We need to go both ends of the spectrum. Yeah.
Sure.
And we have to have so organizations right now are leading everything, and the views of society follow all of that. So it's all about blaming fossil fuels, blaming livestock, coal and oil, for causing the damage. So they've taken that monumental web of complexity and reduced it to blaming planting trees, blaming livestock and fossil fuels. But who manages those things at the end of the day?
Yeah, sure.
I really like that question, Sarah, because people come with this, are we going to plant 2 billion trees and that's it? No, they need pruning, they need tendering, they need,
good luck with that.
Yeah. and on the,
so we've got these huge teak forests here in Africa. Well, all over the world, you got huge forests. They're desert forests. There's nothing growing underneath them. The old trees are dying. Seeds aren't germinating, but we want to plant more trees. Why?
And the other thing that I was about to say is that on the other end of the spectrum, we have people saying, and it holds some true, which is we've got like 80% of the biodiversity in the planet now. It's composed of livestock, and then people say, therefore, we need to stop eating meat. And that's another reductionist sort of attitude, and it's an attitude it's focusing on the problem. Now, I would say, okay, the context is we have reversed. We have too many livestock and not enough biodiversity. But if we understand the ecological principles, then what we need is to use this huge number of livestock in the proper way to
manage different.
Yeah, perfect.
It's the how, not the cow.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all of these things, which is being driven by our big organizations, our environmental organizations, our governments. Everybody's driving these beliefs through society. So I always say to people, did livestock decide to domesticate themselves and put themselves in horrible factory farms and pump themselves full of crap? And no, they didn't choose to live like that. We're managing them like that. And then once we understand brittleness scales and the 4 insights, we know that we can manage livestock in a way that's benefiting the environment. They're not degrading it. We're degrading it by using them badly. So it's like if I picked up a gun and shot you right now, would you blame me or the gun? We're blaming the gun. Don't blame the tool. Blame the manager.
Management. That's it.
Yeah.
It's like what I love about holistic management. It's sometimes it's getting out the mirror and having a dirty, great, big, long look at who's causing. And then that's why I love the rule of succession. A species moves into an environment when the conditions are right for its establishment, but the species moves out when the conditions aren't right for reproduction. And, as humans, we are exactly the same. If we go into a family business, it's okay as a single person, we can establish, but then if the succession isn't right, if the conditions aren't right, then we will move out. If we were thinking about getting married and reproducing and the conditions aren't right, we won't stay, we'll go and we'll do something else. But animals and plants are exactly the same, but who's responsible for the conditions? We are. And that's when the mirror, it's the classic mirror of, okay, I've got to take a look at this. It's not the bird, it's not the neighbors, it's not anyone else, it's actually us. We're creating the conditions for the situation. So it's very humbling, to say the least.
Yeah.
I like that.
And reflective.
Yeah. All right, look, I think we've covered today. So we were talking about difficulties in applying it. So I think it would be a good sort of closing if the two of you commented on why people find difficult to apply the holistic decision making on a daily basis, and then we will come back and cover other issues and go more in depth in sort of all of this body of knowledge, and we're going to share this with people. But it would be nice to have the two of you today commenting on maybe practical ways of actually adopting this new framework of decision making.
Yeah. Well, I guess I think it's easy, you know, you can actually implement it daily if you have your values. I mean, you know, part of it's a bit of a journey, and you need to actually ascertain what your values are and work those out, and your preferred future, what you want your future to look like. But then I think from that becomes your context. But I think from that point is that you actually then, if you think about your business systems and behaviors that you have to have, and then from that you can then work out how-tos and the habits that you have to put in place. So you've got to create an action plan from your context. It's not just a simple, okay, here's your context, there's a lovely piece of paper with lovely words on it on your fridge, that's great, but you've got to actually then action it. So there needs to be some behaviors and business systems that happen a part of all that, and from your values and the preferred future that you say. So if you want love, love is important to you and it's a value, loving family relationships, well, what do you have to do to make that real? Well, you've got to actually have open communication, and you've got to have special times with your partner. Okay, and then you can say, right, once you've got that list, then you say, okay, well, how do I do that? Oh, we go on a date night once a week, or we go to the movies, or we share, we talk to each other, we have a family meeting, there's all these how-tos of actually actions that you can take in order to deliver on your values. And I think that's the most important thing, is it becomes then a diary entry, and every day you start living it, which is actually really valuable.
Yeah. Sarah?
Well, first of all, we're not built to think like this. We don't genetically just do it. So it's going to take a little bit of practice. But all you have to do to get started is to define what whole you're operating within. So it's probably just your family or just you. And then define your holistic context, which includes your values, your livelihood, and you tie those things to the health of your environment. And rather than so up until now, all humans have used the same decision-making process, which is reacting or adapting to a problem. So we have a need, a desire, or a problem, and we either react or adapt to it with no further thought. We take action, and then we deal with the consequences and react or adapt to those later. Whereas when you have a holistic context, you're constantly taking your needs, desires, or problems and aligning them in that web of complexity that we've been talking about it, and proactively bringing about the life that you actually want. So you're saying, I want to live this life. So now, instead of reacting or adapting to problems in my life, I'm going to proactively be constantly making decisions that will bring about the life that I have in my context.
Yeah. Something I've been saying, and this is probably only after I've got in contact with holistic management, is I'm really concerned with the fact that we ask children what they want to be when they grow up, and not how they want to live. Asking how we want to live changes everything. Yeah. And that's, I think, one of the greatest powers of the holistic context, is actually to teach people that you can have a purpose in life, but you have some agency in how you want to live while you actually pursue that purpose.
Yeah.
All right. I spoke with Sarah Savory.
One more thing quickly. When you're doing it with a bigger group, so you say you've got a group of people on that, so a community or whatever, and you say to them, what do you want your lives on this land to look like in 100 years time? What do you want it in 500 years time? How do you see this? And that's what you put in your context, because that's what you're always making decisions towards.
That's right. It's well into the future. Yes.
I like that. And with that thought of actually planning ahead and trying to visualize how life and the land and everything is going to be in the far future, I would like to say that, well, we'll come back with these interactions, talking about mainly about the holistic decision making, but also about the holistic management framework in general. So if anyone watches this and wants to send questions and comments on wherever this is being sort of posted over the internet, we'll try to reply to those questions and comments in future interactions. I spoke with Sarah Savory, independent consultant and dedicated, passionate human being about restoring land and wildlife. Helen Lewis, Australian farmer, managing holistically and pushing the envelope for people to decide things holistically. Thank you, both of you. I'm looking forward to be with you too.